Then the last or second to last part would be Heaven and Hell, the band.
Right. So.
And they put out one album called
They put out one album, but prior to that album, they put out 2 songs. They put out 3 songs with Ronnie Dio when they got back together again. And 2 of the 3 songs, other people disagree, but in my opinion, 2 of the 3 songs that they did prior to the release of the album, and they didn't make it on the album, they were just sort of like, they did these as like, they were putting out a Dio-era Sabbath album compilation. And they had 3 tracks on it, 2 of which are 2 of the best songs I think they ever did together. And that's a big statement, people don't always agree with me on this. But I think the songs are called Shadow of the Wind.
Oh, it's night again. The sun, if the night must end, you've got time to run away. There's a door to dreams, and it always lets you in, but with a silent scream, all the nightmares must begin. You chase what you can see, like death and pain and sin, and the shadow of the wind. The shadow of the wind.
And The Devil Cried. And those 2 songs, to me, your mileage may vary, are as good as anything Sabbath ever did with Dio. They're epically big, colossally good riffs with amazing vocal performances. And they're just spectacular. And the other one was more of an up-tempo type of track called Ear in the Wall, which was kind of more of like a Neon Nights kind of thing. It wasn't the epic. It was more of like, just an up-tempo rocker. But The Devil Cried and Shadow of the Wind is like of that Sign of the Southern Cross type of ilk. And it's just really, really good. And they did that, and then everyone had their hopes up for this album that was coming out. And they decided at that point, Ozzy and Sharon had wrestled the name Black Sabbath back from Tony. Tony had owned it for a while. And then I guess somehow Ozzy and Sharon managed to either buy it back or get it back somehow. And they decided they would call the band with Dio Heaven and Hell. And they got back together, and this was an epic event in metal. I went to see the concert, like I said, in Radio City in 2007, I think it was. I was sitting 2 rows ahead of Eddie Trunk. And everybody who was anybody in metal was at that show, because we'd all been waiting since 92 to see these guys back together. And they didn't disappoint. It was terrific. And like I said, the Radio City show was filmed, but it was just wonderful to hear them back together playing again, and Ronnie sounded great.
Alive, for the powers in war.
what we didn't know at the time, sadly, was that Ronnie was starting to feel the symptoms of stomach cancer. They did put out their album, the Heaven and Hell album, and I wanted so badly to like it, but I just didn't think it stood up. I knew a couple of people who liked it. For me, it just didn't work, and it was nowhere near as good as those 2 tracks that I mentioned.
I did like it.
Okay.
I didn't like it as much as the initial 2 albums from the 80s.
Right.
But Bible Black stands out for me.
Yeah, Bible Black is kind of like a knockoff version of the 2 songs I just mentioned. When you hear those 2 songs and you compare it to anything on the Devil You Know, you will soon realize that nothing on that album stands up like those 2 tracks.
What's the reason you think they didn't include them?
They'd already used them on the compilation.
Right.
The bigger question is, why wasn't the album better? Not why were those tracks so good? Why were these tracks not as good? Right? That was what I wanted to know. I was like, because everybody was so waiting in anticipation of that album, and for a lot of people, it landed with a thud. If you'd never heard Heaven and Hell, and you'd never heard Mob Rules, and you'd never heard Dehumanizer or anything else they ever done, you might really like this album. But if you heard those other albums, this just did not compare.
No, I definitely agree with that.
And the tease was, I mean, the real setup was 2 of these other tracks that they put out were as good a quality as you would expect. It was exactly what you expected on The Devil Cried and Shadow of the Wind. Those 2 were everything you wanted it to be and more. And then when the album came out, finally, it was just like, there's nothing even close to those 2 tracks on that album. And I think, sadly, it was probably because Ronnie was sick and probably not able to, work in the capacity that he would have preferred, During that time, he started having to go get cancer treatments.
That's some serious stuff to go through.
Oh my God, it was absolutely tragic. And he lived in LA, and he was flying every weekend to Houston to the Anderson Cancer Center, which is the best cancer center in the United States. And it was just heartbreaking. He was like, he never gave up. He was fighting till the day he died. And it was just heartbreakingly tragic. And he was going back and forth on a weekly basis getting these treatments. And we all know what those treatments do to people and what they take out of you.
Oh, yeah.
And it's amazing that he got through any of it. He got through the tour, and he got through, making that album, and his voice was still his voice. He didn't, it's not like his voice suffered in that respect, but everything else may have suffered. I don't know. I don't know why that album wasn't better than it was. But so this is just me speculating that I think, the situation had a toll.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably a good reason and a valid reason too.
Yeah, right.
And by the way, what's interesting is that those 3 tracks you mentioned, they are on the Japanese version of the album.
Okay.
They're the 3 last tracks of the album.
Yeah, they were. I think they were originally on a compilation that came out here called Black Sabbath: The Dio Years or something like that. And I was so encouraged that those songs were that good that I thought the album was going to kill, and it just didn't. And
okay.
So
standout songs of the albums are not on the album. The Devil Cried, Shadow of the Wind.
Those were my standouts. And I remember Bible Black, but Bible Black to me is a knockoff of the others.
The next one says, I wish that you were dead. Don't go on, put it back. You're reading from the Bible Black. What's this